On the morning of July the 22nd, 2021, a kayaker discovered what appeared to be a capsized canoe floating in Lake Hartwell near Anderson, South Carolina. The canoe was empty, but personal belongings were still inside. A waterproof bag containing a wallet, car keys, and a cell phone registered to 34-year-old Michelle Keller. The kayaker immediately called 911, and within an hour, search and rescue teams were deployed to the area. Michelle's husband, 37-year-old Brandon Keller, was contacted by authorities and arrived at the lake around noon. He appeared visibly distressed, telling officers that Michelle had gone out for an early morning paddle, something she did regularly during the summer months. He said she had left their house around 6 a.m., and he had expected her back by 9 a.m., but when she didn't return, he assumed she had decided to extend her trip. He had not been concerned until he received the call from police. Search teams scoured the lake for 3 days, using sonar equipment, dive teams, and helicopter surveillance. The area where the canoe was found had strong currents and deep sections, making it plausible that a body could have been pulled under and trapped. Despite extensive efforts, no body was recovered. On July 25th, the search was suspended, and Michelle Keller was presumed dead by drowning. Brandon held a memorial service 2 weeks later. Approximately 150 people attended, including Michelle's parents, her younger sister, and numerous friends from the community. Michelle's cousin, 32-year-old Lauren Pritchard, traveled from her home in Charlotte, North Carolina, to attend the service. She sat in the back row, crying openly, and left immediately after the ceremony without speaking to Brandon or Michelle's family. What no one at that memorial service knew was that Michelle Keller was not dead. She was alive and well, living in a rented apartment in Asheville, North Carolina, approximately 150 miles away. And she was living there with Lauren's husband, 35-year-old Jason Pritchard, who had disappeared from Charlotte 3 weeks earlier under the pretense of accepting a temporary work assignment out of state. The two had been planning Michelle's staged death for nearly 6 months, coordinating every detail to ensure that Michelle could escape her marriage and start a new life without the complications of divorce. Michelle Keller and Brandon Keller had been married for 9 years. They met in 2011, while both were working at a healthcare administration company in Greenville, South Carolina. Michelle was a billing coordinator, and Brandon worked in IT support. They married in 2012 in a small ceremony and settled into a comfortable suburban life. By all outward appearances, their marriage was stable. They owned a 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood, took annual vacations, and were active in their church community. But beneath the surface, Michelle had been deeply unhappy for years. She later told investigators that she felt trapped in a life she no longer wanted, married to a man she no longer loved. She described Brandon as controlling and emotionally distant, though friends and family who knew the couple saw no signs of abuse or serious conflict. Michelle simply wanted out, but she feared the social stigma of divorce and the financial complications it would entail. Michelle's discontent intensified in late 2019 when she reconnected with her cousin Lauren at a family Thanksgiving gathering. Lauren brought her husband, Jason Pritchard, whom Michelle had met only once before at their wedding years earlier. Jason was a construction project manager with an easygoing personality and a sense of humor that Michelle found refreshing. Over the course of the holiday weekend, Michelle and Jason spent considerable time talking, initially in group settings, but eventually one-on-one. By early 20, Michelle and Jason were communicating regularly through text messages and social media. The conversation started innocently enough, discussing family news and shared interests, but gradually became more personal and intimate. By March 20, both had acknowledged romantic feelings for each other. Jason confided that his marriage to Lauren had been struggling for years, and that he felt more connected to Michelle than he had to his own wife in a long time. The affair became physical in June 20 when Michelle drove to Charlotte under the pretense of visiting family. She and Jason met at a hotel near the airport and spent the afternoon together. Over the following months, they continued to meet secretly, always in locations far enough from their respective homes to avoid detection. Both became increasingly convinced that they were meant to be together, and both grew frustrated with the limitations imposed by their existing marriages. By late 20, Michelle and Jason were openly discussing leaving their spouses and starting a life together. However, both faced significant obstacles. Michelle worried that a divorce would result in a lengthy legal battle with Brandon, particularly over the division of assets. The couple owned their home jointly, had shared bank accounts, and had accumulated modest retirement savings. Michelle feared that divorce proceedings would drain their finances and leave her with less than she felt entitled to. Jason faced similar concerns. He and Lauren had 2 young children, ages 4 and 6, and he knew that leaving the marriage would likely result in a protracted custody dispute. He also worried about the social and professional consequences of abandoning his family. His reputation in the construction industry was important to him, and he feared that being labeled as a husband who left his wife and children would damage his career prospects. It was Michelle who first suggested the idea of faking her own death. According to later testimony and digital evidence recovered from their communications, Michelle raised the concept in a text message sent in January 21. She wrote, "What if I just disappeared? What if everyone thought I was dead? Then we could start over and no one would come looking." Jason initially dismissed the idea as unrealistic, but Michelle persisted, arguing that if executed properly, it could solve all of their problems. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Over the next several months, the plan evolved and became more detailed. Michelle researched staged disappearances and drowning accidents, looking for cases where bodies were never recovered and individuals were presumed dead. She learned that drownings in deep lakes often resulted in bodies being lost, particularly if the incident occurred in areas with strong currents or underwater hazards. She identified Lake Hartwell as an ideal location due to its size, depth, and the frequency of recreational boating accidents. Jason's role in the plan was to establish an alibi and create the appearance that he had left Charlotte for legitimate work reasons. He told Lauren and his employer that he had been offered a lucrative short-term contract managing a construction project in Tennessee, requiring him to relocate temporarily. He moved out of the family home in early July 21, citing the demands of the job, and promised to return home on weekends. In reality, he drove directly to Asheville, North Carolina, where he and Michelle had rented a furnished apartment under assumed names. Michelle's preparations were more elaborate. She needed to stage a convincing accident that would result in authorities presuming her death without recovering a body. She purchased a second-hand canoe from a private seller using cash, ensuring there would be no traceable record of the transaction. She also acquired a waterproof bag and filled it with her actual wallet, keys, and phone to make the scene appear authentic. On the morning of July 2nd, 21, Michelle drove to Lake Hartwell, launched the canoe, paddled a short distance from shore, and then deliberately capsized it. She swam to a secluded section of the shoreline, where Jason was waiting in a rental car. The two drove immediately to Asheville, leaving the empty canoe to drift and be discovered by the kayaker later that morning. For the first several weeks after Michelle's staged death, she and Jason lived quietly in their Asheville apartment, avoiding any activity that might draw attention. Michelle cut and dyed her hair, changed her style of dress, and avoided going out in public during daylight hours. Jason worked occasional freelance construction jobs under a false name, paying for everything in cash to avoid creating a digital trail. The two were careful to maintain minimal contact with their former lives. Jason called Lauren once per week, always using a prepaid cell phone, to check on the children and maintain the fiction that he was working out of state. He promised he would return home soon, but repeatedly delayed his timeline, citing project complications and extended deadlines. Lauren, overwhelmed with managing 2 young children alone and dealing with mounting bills, grew increasingly frustrated, but had no reason to suspect anything beyond Jason's poor time management. Michelle had no contact with Brandon or her family. Her phone had been left in the canoe and was recovered by investigators, so she had no way to communicate even if she wanted to. Brandon, meanwhile, was navigating the early stages of grief. He met with an estate attorney to begin the process of settling Michelle's affairs, filed a life insurance claim for the modest $50,000 policy Michelle had through her employer, and started sorting through her belongings. Brandon's grief, however, was complicated by suspicion. In the weeks following Michelle's disappearance, he discovered irregularities in their financial accounts. He noticed that Michelle had withdrawn $3,000 in cash from their joint savings account in the days before her death, supposedly to pay for home repairs. When Brandon contacted the contractor Michelle had mentioned, he learned that no such repair work had been scheduled. He also found that Michelle had transferred $5,000 from their savings to her personal checking account the week before she disappeared. These discoveries troubled Brandon, and he mentioned them to Michelle's sister during a conversation in August 21. The sister suggested that Michelle might have been planning to leave him, and that perhaps her death had not been an accident. Brandon initially rejected this theory, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The first significant crack in Michelle and Jason's plan appeared in mid-September 21, when Lauren Pritchard decided she had waited long enough for her husband to return. Frustrated by Jason's repeated delays and growing suspicious of his vague explanations, Lauren contacted the construction company Jason claimed to be working for in Tennessee. The company had no record of any contract with Jason Pritchard and confirmed they had not hired any project managers matching his description in the past year. Alarmed, Lauren filed a missing person report with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. She provided officers with Jason's last-known phone number and the name of the hotel where he claimed to be staying. Investigators quickly determined that Jason had never checked into any hotel in Tennessee, and that his phone's last-known location, based on cell tower data, had been in western North Carolina, not Tennessee. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, Brandon Keller was conducting his own informal investigation. Unable to shake his suspicion that Michelle had been planning something before her death, he accessed her laptop and began reviewing her browsing history and saved files. He discovered that Michelle had been researching articles about faking death, staged disappearances, and starting over with a new identity. He also found evidence of extensive communication with someone whose contact information had been deleted, but whose messages had been saved in a hidden folder. The messages were between Michelle and Jason and dated back more than a year. They documented the affair, the discussions about leaving their spouses, and ultimately, the detailed planning of Michelle's staged death. Brandon was stunned. He immediately contacted the Anderson County Sheriff's Office and provided them with copies of the messages. Detectives reopened the investigation into Michelle's disappearance, now treating it as a potential fraud case rather than an accidental drowning. They obtained warrants for Michelle's financial records and phone data. Analysis revealed that in the months before her disappearance, Michelle had made several large cash withdrawals, totaling approximately $15,000. She had also researched apartments for rent in Asheville, searched for information about living without identification, and viewed articles about states with lenient policies on false identity documentation. On October 3, 2021, investigators from South Carolina coordinated with law enforcement in North Carolina to locate Jason Pritchard. Cell phone records and financial activity indicated that Jason was in the Asheville area. A license plate reader captured an image of the rental car Jason had been using, parked outside a low-rise apartment complex on the east side of the city. Officers conducted surveillance on the apartment and observed both Jason and a woman matching Michelle Keller's description, entering and exiting the building together. On the evening of October 5, 2021, police executed a search warrant and arrested both individuals. Michelle, who had been using the alias Emma Harris, initially denied her identity, but fingerprint analysis confirmed she was Michelle Keller. Jason did not resist arrest and admitted his identity immediately. Both were taken into custody and transported to separate detention facilities. Michelle was charged with insurance fraud, filing a false police report, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Jason was charged as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy. Both faced additional charges related to identity fraud for using false names to rent the apartment and obtain employment. If you've been following along, hit the like button and let me know in the comments what you think happened here. During interrogation, Michelle admitted to staging her death, but claimed she had done so to escape what she described as an emotionally abusive marriage. She insisted that she had never intended to file the life insurance claim and that Brandon had pursued it on his own. Investigators pointed out that Michelle had been aware of the policy and had factored it into her planning, as evidenced by her communications with Jason. Michelle eventually acknowledged this but maintained that her primary goal had been freedom, not financial gain. Jason provided a similar account, stating that he had participated in the plan because he believed Michelle was in a difficult situation and needed help. He admitted that he had been in love with Michelle and had been willing to risk everything to be with her. However, he expressed regret for the impact his actions had on Lauren and his children. Michelle Keller and Jason Pritchard were arraigned in November 21. Both entered pleas of not guilty, and their cases proceeded separately. Michelle's trial began in March 22 in Anderson County, South Carolina. The prosecution presented a straightforward case built on the digital evidence recovered from Michelle's devices, financial records showing her cash withdrawals and planning activities, and testimony from Brandon Keller about the discovery of the affair and the staged death plan. Prosecutors argued that Michelle had committed fraud by staging her death with the knowledge that it would trigger a life insurance payout and by causing law enforcement to expend significant resources on a search and rescue operation based on false premises. They emphasized that Michelle's actions had caused emotional harm to her family, financial harm to the insurance company, and wasted public resources. Michelle's defense attorney argued that while Michelle had made poor decisions, she had not directly filed a fraudulent insurance claim and had not personally profited from the staged death. The attorney portrayed Michelle as a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage who had seen no other way out and had acted impulsively. The defense requested leniency, suggesting probation and restitution rather than incarceration. The jury was unconvinced. After deliberating for 6 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges: insurance fraud, filing a false report, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Michelle was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after serving 2 years. She was also ordered to pay $47,000 in restitution, covering the cost of the search and rescue operation and the insurance investigation. Jason Pritchard's trial took place in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, in April 2022. He faced charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory after the fact. The evidence against him was primarily based on the communications recovered from Michelle's devices and his own admissions during interrogation. Jason pleaded guilty to conspiracy and was sentenced to 2 years in prison with credit for time served. He was also ordered to pay a portion of the restitution costs. Michelle Keller is currently serving her sentence at the Leith Correctional Institution in South Carolina. She has had minimal contact with her family, most of whom have distanced themselves from her following the revelations about the staged death and the affair. Brandon Keller finalized their divorce in late 2022. He retained ownership of the house and most of the couple's assets. He has since remarried and relocated to a different part of South Carolina. Jason Pritchard was released from prison in early 2024 after serving his full sentence. His marriage to Lauren Pritchard ended in divorce, finalized in 2023. Lauren was granted full custody of their 2 children, and Jason was permitted supervised visitation rights. According to public records, Jason has returned to work in construction but has struggled to rebuild his professional reputation. He has had no contact with Michelle since their arrests. Lauren Pritchard, devastated by the betrayal, has focused on raising her children and moving forward. She has spoken to local support groups about the experience of discovering a spouse's infidelity and the importance of rebuilding trust and stability for children affected by parental abandonment. She has not remarried. Michelle's family held a private gathering in 2023 to acknowledge the trauma caused by her actions and to begin the process of healing. Michelle's parents issued a brief statement expressing their disappointment and sadness, while also acknowledging that they hoped Michelle would use her time in prison to reflect and grow. The case of Michelle Keller and Jason Pritchard serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing personal desires over responsibility and honesty. Michelle's decision to fake her own death rather than pursue a straightforward divorce resulted in criminal charges, incarceration, and the permanent destruction of relationships with her family. Jason's willingness to participate in the scheme cost him his marriage, his relationship with his children, and his freedom. Legal experts have noted that cases involving staged deaths are rare but often result in severe penalties due to the multiple laws violated and the resources wasted by law enforcement and emergency services. In this case, the search and rescue operation alone cost taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars, and the emotional toll on Michelle's family was immeasurable. The lasting question in this case is why Michelle believed that faking her death was a better option than simply filing for divorce. While she claimed to fear the complications of legal proceedings, the reality is that divorce, while difficult, would have been far less destructive than the path she chose. Instead, her actions resulted in a prison sentence, financial ruin, and the loss of nearly every meaningful relationship in her life. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe for more cases like this. Let us know in the comments what you think about this case and where you're watching from today.